They were already old when their children finally decided they were useless, and that quiet decision hurt more than shouting ever could, because it came wrapped in polite excuses, busy schedules, unanswered calls, and doors that no longer opened for them. And as the bus drove away and left them standing with two worn suitcases and nowhere to go, something inside them broke silently, not in anger, but in deep sadness, the kind that settles into the bones, because they had not been bad parents, they had worked, sacrificed, stayed awake at night worrying, and still ended up abandoned like forgotten furniture, and they did not cry in front of each other, they never did, they just walked slowly toward the old land they still owned on paper, a forgotten hillside with weeds and stones, because humiliation teaches you to keep your pain private. The man spoke little, always had, his strength was quiet, shaped by years of labor and responsibility, while the woman carried her pain in her eyes, watching him struggle with the weight of suitcases and pride, and when they reached the land and saw nothing but dry grass and an old, half-collapsed shed, helplessness wrapped around them like cold air, because this was all that remained of a lifetime of work, and they sat down without speaking, listening to the wind, knowing no one was coming to help, knowing their children were warm and comfortable somewhere far away, and that knowledge pressed down harder than hunger, but they stayed, because patience is what old people learn when fighting back no longer changes anything. Days passed slowly, marked by small routines, gathering firewood, fixing what could still stand, sharing memories they never spoke about before, and in that quiet, something unexpected happened. Hope did not arrive loudly, it arrived as habit, as waking up and choosing to continue, as small smiles over shared bread, as the understanding that even abandoned people can still choose each other. And one afternoon, while clearing weeds near the hillside, the man's shovel struck something solid beneath the soil, not rock, not tree root, but something hollow, and he stopped, listening, because patience teaches you to notice details others rush past, and when they brushed away the dirt together, they uncovered the edge of a stone slab, carefully placed, deliberately hidden, and their hearts beat faster, not with excitement, but with fear, because hidden things are rarely kind to those already broken. As they lifted the slab, struggling with age-weakened arms, a dark opening revealed itself, cold air rising from below like a breath from the past, and the woman covered her mouth, because something about that darkness felt intentional, like a secret buried to be forgotten, and for a moment they considered closing it again, walking away, pretending they never saw it, because injustice teaches people to avoid trouble, but quiet hope whispered that maybe, just maybe, the world had not taken everything from them yet, and they lowered a small light into the passage, seeing stone steps descending into the earth, carved long ago, leading somewhere unknown, and they stood there holding hands, old, abandoned, afraid, yet strangely steady, unaware that what waited below was tied not just to forgotten history, but to the same powerful arrogance that had made their own children believe they were disposable, and that patience, once again, was about to be tested before justice could finally surface. They did not go down that day, because fear is heavier when you have already lost too much, and instead they covered the stone again and returned to their routine, pretending nothing had changed, but the passage stayed in their minds like an unanswered question, and that night neither of them slept well. Because helplessness has a way of turning curiosity into quiet hope, and by morning the man said only one sentence, that if the world had already taken their children, their home, and their dignity, then it could not take their courage too, and they went back with a small lamp and careful steps, lowering themselves slowly into the earth, each step creaking with age and uncertainty, the air growing colder, the walls smoother, clearly built by human hands with purpose, not accident, and the deeper they went, the more the woman felt that familiar feeling of being small in a system she did not understand, the same feeling she had felt years ago when banks refused loans, when officials dismissed them, when powerful people smiled and turned away. At the bottom they found a narrow chamber, reinforced with stone and iron, and inside it were old crates, sealed, marked with faded symbols, and at first they thought it was nothing more than forgotten storage, another disappointment waiting to finish them, but when the man pried one open, his hands shaking, they saw documents, stacks of papers wrapped in oilcloth, in metal boxes that felt far too heavy for their size, and helplessness returned sharply, because they did not understand what they were holding, only that it did not belong to ordinary people, and that fear grew when they saw dates, signatures, official stamps, names of companies and families that still ruled the region, names spoken with respect and fear even now. They realized slowly that the passage was not abandoned by accident. It had been buried deliberately, hidden when times changed, when power needed to erase its own footsteps, and as they read more, with difficulty and confusion, they understood that what lay before them was evidence, proof of land stolen, of families forced out, of money moved in silence, of lives broken without records, and quiet hope began to stir. Not because they wanted revenge, but because for the first time in years, they were holding something that powerful people did not want found, and that knowledge gave them a strange sense of balance, as if the world had tilted back slightly in their favor. Still, patience guided them, because they had lived long enough to know that rushing truth only gets it buried again, and they hid the documents back, covering the passage carefully, returning to their small routines while thinking, watching, waiting, and in the village above, things began to change without them saying a word. Officials came surveying land, rumors spread about investigations, names once untouchable began appearing in whispered conversations, and the old couple watched quietly, saying nothing, enduring suspicion, enduring loneliness, enduring the weight of knowing that justice moves slowly and often asks the innocent to wait the longest, but they waited anyway, because waiting was something life had trained them to do better than anyone. They continued their quiet vigilance, returning to the passage only when no one watched, moving slowly, carefully cataloging what they could without exposing themselves, and in that hidden chamber, surrounded by decades of secrets, they began to piece together a story of power, arrogance, and theft that spanned generations, realizing that the families who had abandoned them and taken everything were connected to the names in the crates, and sadness returned, heavier than before, because the betrayal they felt as parents was nothing compared to the system that had allowed those children to believe their lives had no value. Helplessness lingered like a shadow, because even with proof, the world above was still dangerous, and one wrong move could undo everything, but quiet hope had grown too strong to ignore, and they made small plans, always patient, always careful, testing letters and whispers to see how the powerful would react without revealing their hand, and as days turned into weeks, they noticed cracks in the armor of untouchable men, small slips, hints of unease, and that patience felt like a shield, stronger than anger or fear, because it allowed them to remain unseen while the truth gathered weight. They spoke little to each other, sharing glances and small nods, their quiet strength feeding each other, and one evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, the man said that for the first time since their children left, he felt in control, not because of force, but because justice was no longer completely out of reach, and the woman smiled softly, knowing that her own courage had carried them this far, that their endurance had turned helplessness into possibility, and slowly, deliberately, they began leaving traces, hints of the passage, whispers of documents, carefully calculated to reach the right people, lawyers, journalists, investigators who could not be bought or intimidated, and each small step felt like a victory, unseen but undeniable. And then, one morning, the world above responded, first in quiet ripples, then in larger waves. The untouchable families began to worry, subtle inquiries arrived, meetings were postponed, money withheld, and for the first time, those who had wielded arrogance as a shield realized that their power had limits, and the couple, watching from their hillside, old, tired, abandoned by their own children, allowed themselves a single quiet breath of triumph, because patience had worked, because justice, slow and deliberate, had finally begun to move in their favor, and for the first time in decades, they felt alive, not as victims, but as survivors who had discovered that even hidden passages, buried deep, can open a path to truth and reckoning. Weeks turned into months, and the old couple continued their quiet, deliberate efforts, never rushing, never revealing themselves, only guiding truth through careful hints and subtle evidence, and the world above began to shift in ways they could not have imagined. Powerful families trembling as secrets long thought buried came to light, officials who once ignored pleas now paused, questions were asked, investigations began, and the ripple of long-suppressed justice grew steadily, unstoppable, because patience has a way of moving mountains when force alone cannot. They returned to the hidden chamber one last time, carefully cataloging everything, sealing documents and crates with precision, knowing that what they had uncovered would outlive them, and as they closed the stone slab, the man looked at his wife, older, tired, yet fierce, and said quietly that they had done what few could, standing against power, against indifference, against a world that had tried to erase them, and she nodded, tears running silently down her face, because the weight of injustice had finally been met with the quiet force of endurance and wisdom, and for the first time in years, they felt the world tilt back just slightly, in their favor. Their children never returned, and the couple did not seek them, because they understood at last that abandonment could not erase courage, and the passage they had discovered remained their secret, a testament to their resilience, a hidden archive of truth, and as autumn winds swept across the hillside, they stood side by side, feeling the strength that comes from patience, endurance, and quiet hope, knowing that justice had finally arrived not as vengeance, but as recognition of the lives that had been wronged, and for the first time, they allowed themselves to breathe fully, to walk freely, to live without the shadow of humiliation, because even the abandoned can rise, even the overlooked can become powerful, and even buried secrets can reshape the world above. They left the land behind finally, 2 suitcases in hand, hearts heavy yet unbroken, and as they walked toward a new life, they carried not only proof of corruption, but proof of their own strength, proof that injustice can be faced with patience, and that even those cast aside, even those left alone by children, by society, by time, can uncover buried paths, reveal hidden truths, and find a quiet, lasting justice that no arrogance, no power, no influence can ever take away.